Hello and welcome to another edition of the NASCAR Fix. I'm Jeff Woods and it's Speed Week. And it's also 20 years since Dale Earnhardt Jr. won the first of his 2 Daytona 500 trophies. And so I thought it might be a good idea to reminisce a little and reflect a little on that 2004 Daytona 500, which I think is one of the more exciting Daytona 500s in history. And not just because Dale Earnhardt Jr. was the winner. So we're going to get into that a little bit. And I'll explain why I think it was such an exciting race, and really, I think it had everything. And I know if you're a Dale Jr. fan, you certainly loved it, and I think if you were just a NASCAR fan in general, this was a great race. And we'll start with a few reasons. Number one, you had top stars competing for that race throughout the entire run, specifically in the last 100 or so laps. Of course, the winner, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Tony Stewart, who led most of the central part of the race, and Jeff Gordon. You could argue those are three biggest stars in NASCAR at the time, and they're all there in the top 5 fighting for the win. And not only that, you also had the underdog story. And every year, it seems like, nearly every year, there's always one guy who you never expect. You know, where did that guy come from? We did not see this coming. And that year, it was Scott Wimmer driving for Bill Davis in the Caterpillar number 22. He ended up finishing 3rd as a rookie, and he was the only other guy in the lead draft with Earnhardt and Stewart that was on the lead lap. And he made a great call. His crew chief, Frankie Stoddard, made a great call toward the end of the race to only take 2 tires. It was an outside gamble, probably wasn't going to win him the race, and it ultimately didn't, of course, but he made one heck of a call that kept him in that top group. He was staying in that lead draft, and he was able to capitalize on one heck of a finish, probably the highlight of Scott Wimmer's career. I also like the fact that you had the X factor in this whole thing and played such a critical role down the stretch. I'm talking about Kurt Busch. Kurt Busch was a lap car the entire second half of the race, but he played such a big role in the outcome of the race, or at least he tried to. If you recall, he was a lap down, but was staying in that lead pack the entire time. And he was a great car to run with and draft with because you were not fighting him for position. You could use him as a way to stay in the pack, use him as a pusher, or push him, get toward the front, and you weren't losing a position for it. But the best thing about it was that Kurt Busch had a fantastic car, and he also had a little vendetta, and he was not going to help Dale Earnhardt Jr. if he could help it. In fact, when Dale Earnhardt Jr. made his move for the lead on Tony Stewart, Kurt Busch went with Stewart to try to keep Stewart in front. But Dale Jr. had such a strong car and made such a great move down the backstretch on that side draft that he was able to get by, and then after that, it was game over. The way Jr. made that pass, it really seemed like he was just waiting for the right moment to make his move. He had to make it, although I have to believe he did have to time it perfectly, and I think he did. But man, once he got out front, it was over. I mean, Stewart couldn't even get close, and Kurt Busch, even if he could have helped Tony Stewart, I'm not sure it would have made a difference. But Kurt being there and the role that he would potentially play, and the role he tried to play, it just added so much drama to the last 20 laps of that race because you weren't sure if he was going to help Tony Stewart get back around Dale Jr. That wouldn't have been a popular thing, although I'm not sure how popular Kurt Busch was at the time to begin with. But it was one of those things. You know, people are going to say that the long green flag run at the end of the race, you know, maybe thinned out the field and spread everyone out, and it did, but I don't think it hindered the racing at all. The racing at the top of the leaderboard in that second half of the race was still just as good. And I'm someone, I know I go against the grain on this a lot of the time, but I love long green flag runs, especially at restrictor plate tracks. I'm not someone who wants to see the big pack all the time and have the accident happen, which is always what happens when there's a big pack. I want to see these guys string out, and I want to see the top cars outshine the other cars. And when you get strung out like that, it's going to happen. And that is exactly what happened. You had Tony Stewart, Jeff Gordon, Dale Earnhardt Jr., Kurt Busch, even though he was a lap down. Kevin Harvick, Jimmy Johnson, Matt Kenseth, they were all near the front as well. Greg Biffle also, whose race ended when he got caught speeding on pit road on that final pit stop. But you had the main guys, the guys who were contenders up front, battling for the win, and they were already separated from the rest of the field, and they didn't need a caution to bunch them back up. And ultimately, it came down to 3 cars battling for the win. And did that decrease the excitement of the end of the race? No, not at all. Now, let's be honest. It was Dale Earnhardt Jr. Almost no one was going to complain that Dale Earnhardt Jr. was en route to winning the Daytona 500, and no one was going to care that there was a long green flag run to end the race. In fact, the last 120 laps ran under green. Now, I know stages would prevent that from happening now, but when would you see a Daytona 500 run 120 laps under green to end the race? You're just not going to see it these days, and that's what I enjoyed about it. It gave the opportunity for the top cars to separate themselves from the rest of the field and settle it amongst themselves. And sure, they could have gotten into an accident battling for the win, but it didn't happen because the drivers were just so good at the time, and they still are good now. But when you're pack racing, you're leaving so many things up to chance. And I just like the fact that there was a run where the guys could kind of, separate from the group and settle it amongst themselves, like I was saying. It was just, I thought it was a race that had everything you needed. It had the big wreck right around the midway point when Michael Waltrip flipped down the backstretch, but it also had some great racing at the end. It had drama. It had uncertainty. It had stars at the top of the race competing for the win. It had the underdog story. It had the X factor in Kurt Busch. And at the end of the day, it had a storybook ending with Dale Earnhardt Jr. and one of the more popular wins of the last 20 years. And of course, it was just the first of 2 Daytona 500 victories. Again, the fact that Dale Jr. won obviously makes it one of the more popular races, but I think just overall, it provided some awesome entertainment, some good racing, and it's one that I really enjoy watching back. I've watched the end of that race, about the last 30 to 40 laps, several times, and I'm just fascinated by how everything unfolded. The last pit stop that took Greg Biffle out, the last pit stop where Scott Wimmer made the 2-tire change to just roll the dice. It was also the pit stop where Jeff Gordon was not able to stay hooked up to Junior and Stewart, and that took him out of contention. And really, it put it down between Stewart and Junior, with Kurt Busch deciding who was going to win, even though that's not what happened because he tried to go with Tony Stewart and Dale Earnhardt Jr. still won the race. But anyway, I just wanted to spend a few minutes just talking about that race because I know a lot of fans enjoyed it. I enjoyed it, and it's 20 years ago that it happened, and it's a lot of fun to think about it and look back on it. And I just hope that we get a Daytona 500 this weekend as exciting as the one in 2004. Well, the Twins are coming up on Thursday. I'm sorry, the duels. The duels are coming up on Thursday. I will have some reaction to those 2 races probably the next morning. And of course, I'll have plenty of reaction to the Daytona 500 upon its completion on Sunday. But just wanted to get out here and just talk a little racing because I'm certainly excited for it. And I know you guys are too. And so we'll talk again later in the week. But for now, I'm Jeff Woods. And this has been the NASCAR Fix.